But Bryson, I can't take a sick day. My lesson rotation will get messed up. Let's talk about how you can do it.
You're listening to That Music Podcast with Bryson Tarvit, the curriculum designer and educational consultant behind That Music Teacher and the Elementary Music Summit. Each week, Bryson and his guests will dive into the reality of being an elementary music teacher and how music can truly be transformative in the lives of the students you serve. Show notes and resources mentioned in this episode can be found at thatmusicteacher.com.
Hello and welcome back to That Music Podcast. Last week we talked about the importance of taking a much needed sick day, but often the next hurdle and often what we kind of listen in the back of our minds is, well, I can't take this sick day because it's going to mess up the rotation. It's going to derail my wonderful lesson plans. First grade it will be on different lessons and things like that. And today we're going to talk about that because it's a real problem. Traditional lesson plan often ties lessons to specific dates, making missed dates feel like a major setback, especially if you don't see your kids every day. Let's be honest. Most of us do not see our kids every day. So how do we do that? That's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be sharing a simple, but I think really powerful strategy that's going to really help you think about your sick days and lesson planning. And this is just simple, just using a lesson numbering system. So it's going to keep your curriculum flowing no matter what, no matter if you're sick, no matter if they're on a field trip, no matter if X, Y, Z, as long as you know what lesson number they're on, they're going to stay in the sequence that they need to be in. And I think that's the really important part. So let's talk a little bit about the problem with date-based lesson planning. So first of all, I know that a lot of you are on schedules where you see, these kids on Mondays, these kids on Tuesdays, et cetera, et cetera. But then we have Mondays off, or we have a Friday off for a long weekend, and they just don't get class. First of all, I'm a huge proponent of not doing that, of just pushing everything one day, but that's a different story. But basically, you have the option of either squeezing a week's worth of content into fewer days, or completely reshuffling your lessons to, add in an extra thing for those that don't miss it. It's really easy to feel pressure to teach something specific on a given date. Even if the class isn't ready for it, or maybe Mrs. Johnson's class was on, the day they were supposed to come to music, they were on a field trip. So they're actually, quote unquote, behind the other classes in first grade. So this approach is really stressful because it prioritizes the calendar over the realities of what's happening in your classroom, including student progress and teacher well-being. So let's flip that script a little bit. And instead of saying on August 15th, we're going to do this lesson, let's use the lesson numbering system. Which is really simple. It's not one of those fancy names. It's literally just giving each one of your lessons a number. So let's talk about the core concept. So instead of assigning a date to your lesson, you assign a number. So this is first grade lesson 1, and that's it. So this is first grade lesson 2. This is first grade lesson 12. Whatever it is, you're basically creating a sequence of lessons rather than date-based. And each homeroom, each homeroom teacher that's coming with you, they're going to progress through the lessons in order, regardless of the calendar. So for instance, if Mrs. Johnson class missed a week because of a field trip, well, cool. If everyone else is on lesson 3, they might be on lesson 2. That's okay. That's what's but they're still going to get all the things, and they're going to be able to still progress towards that end goal a little bit better. So how do we do this? What's the practical implementation? First of all, when you're mapping out your curriculum, I highly recommend that you're just creating a sequence of content. So basically, rhythmically, where do we start? Where do we end? And kind of what's the journey along the way? Don't give specific dates to things. You can give them ballparks, but don't say, hey, on August 15th, they're going to learn steady beat. That's just, you're setting yourself up for failure because the reality is that teaching changes. So I think here are some things that I think you can really do. So first of all, when you're sitting down to lesson plan, I think it's really important. I've actually done it both ways, and I really think it can, depending on who you are as a person, you might like one way or the other. So I've done it where I've done, all right, I'm going to do all of lesson 5. So kindergarten lesson 5, first lesson 5, second grade lesson 5, I'm going to work on all of those in one chunk. That way I can think about all right, what materials are you going to have out for third grade that I could use for second grade, so I don't have to put them away and bring them out. But then I've also done it where, hey, I'm going to work only on first grade, and I'm going to do lesson 1, 2, and 3 so I can see how they sequence a little bit better between the three. Whichever one works best for you is fine. Honestly, me with my ADHD brain, I typically flip flop. So like I'll do a few weeks and I'm feeling really good about, doing it in chunks. And then I'm like, I'm getting bored. So I'm going to do all, the entire grade, all the grade levels for one lesson. And then eventually I'll go back. And there are a couple ways that you can do this. So first of all, if you have a physical binder or a folder, I'm a huge believer in having physical lesson plans, even if you just print them off, like if you're a digital planner, but so you can have them with you as you're teaching. But like I would literally just have a binder and I would have all my first grade lesson plans in one tab and so on. And I would just know that, all right, I'm going to pull out this thing. And then when I'm done teaching, I put it back in the binder so that I know where I have it. Bonus tip. When you go to lesson plan next year, you essentially have a year's worth of lesson plans in a book that you can use as your starting off point, which makes it a lot easier. Also, I've also done it where I've used a digital spreadsheet, like on Google Sheets. It's easy and easier to track. Basically, create a new tab for each grade level, and put it in there. And then here's the important part. So all of your lessons, instead of having a date, they have a number. The important part is to have somewhere to be your master list of every homeroom that you teach and what lesson they're on. So for instance, I would start at the beginning of the year, I would print out all the homeroom teachers, I would laminate it, and I would use a dry erase marker or wet erase marker or whatever, and I would say, all right, they're on lesson 1. And then when I pulled out lesson 1 out of my binder in the morning to teach it to them, I would change it to lesson 2 so that I knew the next time that they came into my classroom, or the next time that I'm pulling lesson plans, I'm pulling lesson 2. So I always knew what they were on. Or you could do that digitally, but regardless, make sure you keep track of what homeroom is on which lesson. Otherwise, this whole lesson, this whole strategy falls apart because you don't know who's teaching what. And for instance, if you go to pull, lesson plans for the day, and you know that Miss Johnson's class is out at a field trip, you're just not going to pull a lesson plan, so you're not going to update the number. So they're still on that lesson. That's the lesson that they need to teach. So let's say that Mrs. Davis's class is on lesson 7 and Mr. Brown's class is on lesson 8. You need to take a sick day, and when you return, Mrs. Davis's class is still going to need lesson 7 because they got a subplan instead or whatever. And Mr. Brown's class is still going to need lesson 8. It's that simple. Everything just kind of moves forward. And that allows you more flexibility so you're not having to worry about all the other things. So what are some benefits about this? So what I love about this is it really helps for being aware of your students. So there are some times where I'm doing a concept. I'm a Kodai influence teacher, so sometimes we're getting closer and closer to a present moment, and there are classes that are ready, and then there are classes in the grade that are really not ready, and they need an extra day. All right, cool. So if a class needs an extra day in a concept, you can give it to them without feeling like you're holding the rest of the grade behind. So essentially, if lesson 9 is my presentation moment, and Mrs. Davis's class is not ready, all right, maybe instead of just going 8 to 9, I do 8, and then I do an 8B or 8.5 or whatever. I create another day to allow more practice, more preparation for that concept. It's also better for differentiation because different classes can now move at different speeds without disrupting your overall curriculum flow. And I feel like some of you might be going, well, Bryson, then you're going to have grades or classes that get farther than others. Yeah, let's be honest. We already have that. They just might, you might have classes that were held back a little bit because the rest of the grade wasn't quite ready to move forward. And then you might have classes that you pushed them along even though they weren't really ready. So quite frankly, we're already doing that if you're using a date-based system likely. So yeah, sometimes Mrs. Davis's class might end the year with, I don't know, arbitrarily 25 lessons. And maybe, Mrs. Johnson's class, I don't know, I'm losing track of my names, but maybe they got 2 less lessons, but they practiced or they repeated a lesson, or, they missed a day. So they didn't get it. Like, that's okay. And I think that when you're doing that, you're planning a sequence of learning, not a rigid schedule. And this is going to allow you to be free to respond to your student needs and also not feel like you're constantly stressing about not being where you're supposed to be, because everyone's on their own journey. Like, that sounds a little woo, but the reality is in education, everyone is on their own journey. And by having every class, every homeroom kind of in a different spot in the sequence is okay. as long as you have these things to help you remember where they are. So here are some actionable steps. First of all, think about your current classroom setup, your lessons, if you have units or whatever. How can you break these down into distinct numbered lessons? And it really might be as simple as, instead of saying, August 15th, just put lesson 1, and it's the same thing. You're just changing a label. And then I also want you to pick a tracking method that works for you, because I want to be very clear. This method, this plan, this idea completely falls apart if you don't remember where each homeroom is. There's nothing worse, and I've done this, than doing a presentation lesson and you're like, wow, the kids are doing really good. And then you get to the presentation and you're like, this is actually taught. And they go, yeah, we did that last week. And I'm like, okay, where have you been the last 20 minutes? Why has no one told me we've been doing the same lesson? So being aware of where the students are in the curriculum is really important. So whether you're doing it something digital tracking or some sort of, put like I did, like laminated it on the wall so that I always knew where I was going, just choose one that works. And if all else fails, just remember that the goal is to get students closer to that end goal. The way we get them there as music teachers, we often have a lot of flexibility. So take it, use that flexibility, find something that works for you. And I really hope that this helps make it a little bit easier. So I'm curious, do you use lesson numbering or do you use date-specific lesson planning? Have I maybe kind of got you thinking about making a switch? Send us an email, hello@thatmusicteacher.com, or a message on Instagram @thatmusicteacher, and let us know your thoughts on this. I really hope that this is going to help give you peace of mind to not only just simplify your lesson planning and make it easier, but also to give you the idea of when you take a sick day, it's not going to ruin everything. It's just going to move everything. And that's where, for me, it was really huge, because I knew that eventually we would get back on track and we would get into, we would figure it out again. It was going to be okay. We were still going to move forward. So this strategy, combined with, having some generic subplans that we talked about a little bit last time, that really can empower you to prioritize your health or your family's health when you need to take a sick day. Next week, we're going to be diving deeper into subplans, and I'll share my favorite strategy, which is using digital subplans. So be sure to check out episode 207 next week if that's something that intrigues you. Because I have to say, one of my biggest changes, one of the best things I've ever done, changed my career forever. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of That Music Podcast. I hope that you will be able to leave us a review or comment or subscribe wherever you're watching. That really helps us understand kind of where you are and what kind of your listening habits are. And it also helps us understand what topics you want to hear more in the future. With that being said, I want to end this episode like I end most things, which is thanking you for making a difference in the lives of the students that you teach. See you next time.